You know, there's one kafir, I forget his name now, but he said a very long time ago. He said, you know, China is like a sleeping dragon. Let it sleep. Because if this dragon, it wakes up, then the entire world will tremble. Let me tell you something for free, without you to even go on any homework or without you even going on the internet. The Shabab, my dear brothers, they are waking up around the world. Indeed they are. In Palestine, the Shabab, they are waking up with their stones in their hand, they are waking up. They are calling for the Sharia, my dear brothers, within Palestine. They are calling for the Sharia within Iraq, within Afghanistan, within Indonesia, within Shishan. And by Allah, my dear brothers and sisters, we the Shabab, we will wake up within the West and we will call for the Sharia here within the UK. Follow the example of the Nabi Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. When he entered inside Mecca, those Quraysh, they came to him. And what did they say to him? They said, oh Muhammad, just give us 2 months. Just give us 1 year. Just give us a couple of days to just carry on worshipping our idols. You know what the Nabi Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam he did? He destroyed those idols one by one. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, he revealed the ayah. وَقُلْ جَعَ الْحَقِّ وَتَحَقُ الْبَاطِلِ. In our lifetime, my dear brothers, we will see the Khalif inside the White House quicker than they can call us a terrorist. Why? Because the hadith has said, Ash-Shabab, Shu'la bin-Nar. The youth, they are the spark of the fire. Either they will burn the way, or they will pave the way. Definitely, my dear brothers and sisters, our role within the West is to call for Islam, command, God forbid, even burn the way of democracy and pave the way for the Sharia. Not within UK, not within America, not within Pakistan, but over the whole world. Wa sallallahu Sayyidina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sallam.
The Prophet Muhammad died 1400 years ago. In that time, his ideas have served to darken the world wherever they have gained a foothold. Take, for example, Muhammad's belief in the existence of the jinn and their baneful influence. This belief has meant that even now, Muslims suffering from mental health problems are commonly regarded as being possessed and thus not afforded proper psychiatric treatment. Among the afflicted, this belief is no less prevalent. In a 2018 study, researchers in the Netherlands found that in Muslim patients, attributing mental health symptoms to the jinn was much more common than previously assumed. To quote from the paper at length, quote, "In the Quran, jinn are described as beings created by Allah out of smokeless fire. They are mentioned in 29 different places, including the chapter entitled Al-Jinn, and one about King Solomon. In the Hadith, the sayings of the Prophet, jinn play an even more prominent role, although they are described most evocatively in Islamic folk belief. On the basis of these sources, jinn are conceptualized as beings normally invisible to the human eye, but capable of making themselves visible if they so wish, and also capable of interfering with humans in powerful ways. Thus, they are endowed with the ability to travel great distances with incredible speed, to eavesdrop on humans and supernatural beings, to move through concrete walls, to appear in the shape of various animals, to take possession of humans, and to marry humans in secret, to thus prevent them from entering a human relationship. As they are also said to be easily offended and to live much longer than humans, they are considered capable of settling old scores with those who offended them, bridging successive generations. Because of this unnervingly unequal power balance, and the fact that the existence of jinn is part and parcel of the Islamic worldview, in many Muslims, these beings spring to mind whenever something goes wrong. Although all participants had a Muslim background, of the 49 interviewees, 2 had converted to Christianity. In conformity with their newfound faith, both of these participants stated that they did not attribute any of their symptoms to jinn, black magic, or the evil eye. Of the remaining group of 47 Muslim interviewees, 38 believed in the evil eye, 30 in magic, and 37 in jinn. Moreover, 27 claimed to have had first-hand experiences with one or more jinn in the past, versus 11 who denied any personal encounters, and 9 participants who expressed their doubts about this. When asked whether it was possible that their psychiatric symptoms were caused by these metaphysical beings, in the group of interviewees, 21 confirmed this, 11 were convinced that this was not the case, and the remaining 15 expressed doubts as to whether jinn had anything to do with their mental health problems, although they admitted that they had considered the possibility. One participant was so overwhelmed that it was not possible to explore the theme in any more depth. In the present study, we met a patient who believed that she was haunted by a jinn who wanted to marry her. Feeling thereby deprived of the life she wanted to live, she felt trapped to such an extent that she showed signs of utter helplessness. As a consequence, she dismissed all biomedical interventions indiscriminately, thereby contributing even further to her own feelings of helplessness, as well as of those of all parties involved, including her family. In effect, through her behaviour, the jinn was perceived by them as holding her hostage and as playing a role in the family dynamics that was just as real as had a person prevented her from getting married." Unquote. When Muhammad wasn't busy fear-mongering over the jinn, he was sharing his insights on the cosmos. For example, he taught that the earth is flat, quote, like a carpet spread out, and that the sky is a physical structure which can fall down and kill us. He also claimed that fever is caused by the fires of hell, and that camel urine is a cure for many diseases. Indeed, practitioners of Islamic medicine claim that camel urine cures coronavirus. Like so much else, Muhammad made these assertions without a shred of evidence. He had no desire to understand the natural world. On the contrary, he taught that inquiring into the origins of things is a symptom of satanic possession. To quote from Sahih al-Bukhari, quote, "Satan comes to one of you and says, 'Who created so-and-so?' until he says, 'Who has created your Lord?' When he inspires such a question, one should seek refuge with Allah and give up such thoughts." Unquote. This fundamental hostility to science means that rationalism and empiricism can only ever be an aberration of Islam, and thus destined to be shut down. This happened on a large scale in the 11th century, when the influential Persian theologian Al-Ghazali declared the supremacy of faith over philosophy in understanding the nature of reality. Indeed, Ghazali's fundamental thesis was that all causal events and interactions are not the product of material conjunctions, but rather the immediate will of Allah. Thus, with the rise of Ghazali's ideas, scientists like Ibn Sina and Ibn Rushd would find themselves living on the run to avoid being executed for heresy. The astrophysicist Neil deGrasse Tyson does well to make this point.
It was in Baghdad 1,000 years ago where they invented algebra. And there was advances in mathematics, agriculture, engineering, all of these fields. All at a time when Europe was disemboweling heretics. So something changed. 12th century, this gentleman came around, Al-Ghazali, a Muslim scholar, learned. At this point, Islam is maybe just a few hundred years old. People are reading the Quran and interpreting it however they sort of want to and feel like it. There's not a coherence to the practice of Islam until he comes around and codifies the behavior of a good Muslim. In much the same way St. Augustine, in his book Cities of God, codified what it is to be a good Christian. How do you burn the witches? There's a recipe for that. They got to be upside down so the blood does, There's a whole itinerary for how to be a good Muslim. And in his writings contain the assertion that the actions that you see in nature are the will of Allah. Well, if you drop a stone and it falls, Allah willed that. If that's your explanation, your curiosity stops. The entire enterprise of that golden era collapses. Now, historians, when they look at that era, they say, well, the Mongols came and they, so historians think of the world in terms of wars and kings. They think less about it philosophically, about intellectual movements or the absence thereof. Islam rose again after this period, didn't have science associated with it. No new inventions in math. You look at the period of Islam in Spain, the period where the great Alhambra was built. There is no attendant science going on there. It's done, it's gone, and it is a cost that exists to this day. There is 1.3 billion Muslims in the world today who are not participants on the frontier of scientific discovery. What's the best measure of this? Just check out the Nobel Prizes. I tallied them, okay? How many Jews have won the Nobel Prize? In the sciences, here they go. 25% of all Nobel Prizes in the sciences are won by Jews. How many Jews in the world? About 15 million, tops? 15 million? How many Muslims in the world? 1.3 billion, which is huger, way huger than 15 million. How many Muslims have won the Nobel Prize in the sciences? 2.5. 2. I can't bring myself to call economics a science. I'm sorry. I just can't. I've tried. I've really tried. I'm sorry. That's how many. And the physics one was a Pakistani physicist, not a Middle Eastern physicist. So, Jews have 50 times the number of Nobel Prizes. They're 1/80th of the population of the Muslims. It's 4,000 times the impact. I lose sleep every night wondering how many secrets of the universe lay undiscovered because 1/6 of the population of the world is not a participant on the exploration frontier. What thoughts have gone undreamt of?
Science in the Arab world flourished in spite of Islam, not because of it. This is something which must be recognized once and for all. The Arab Golden Age, as we should be calling it, was scuppered by the anti-evidentialism of Muslim scholars who expanded and codified the anti-intellectualism of Muhammad. The effects of this calamity have been permanent. Indeed, according to the 2002 Arab Human Development Report, in the 1,000 years since the reign of the Caliph Ma'mun, the Arab world has translated as many books as Spain translates in a single year. Recognizing the stultifying effects of Islam, this brave Iraqi news anchor vocalizes what most Muslims dare not admit to themselves.
منذ 1400 عام عاشوا في البراري، ناموا في المضارب، أضاءوا لياليهم بإشعال الزيت والحطب. لم يعرفوا غير الرعي والسبي والغزوات. تقاتلوا، تحاربوا، تناحروا، تزاوجوا. منذ 1400 عام تركوا لنا قصصا وسيرا ذاتية وأحاديث ونصوص قالوا إنها مقدسة كما قال الذين من قبلهم. وبعد 1400 عام يتوجب علينا أن نفكر كما كانوا يفكرون، أن نلبس كما كانوا يلبسون، أن نعيش كما كانوا يعيشون، أن نتقاتل كما كانوا يتقاتلون، أن نتزوج كما كانوا يتزوجون. 1400 عام من التزوير والمطلوب أن نصدق كل ما وردنا. 1400 عام من الصلوات والدعاء على اليهود والنصارى لتشتيت شملهم، ولم يتبقى لنا شمل، لتدمير أوطانهم، ولم يتبقى لنا أوطان، لسبي نسائهم، ولم تسبى إلا نساء المسلمين. 1400 عام من صلوات الاستسقاء والأمطار تغمر العالم إلا بلاد المسلمين. 1400 عام من الزكاة وعدد الجياع والمحرومين يزداد كل يوم في بلاد المسلمين. أيتها الأمة النائمة، إن من تصلون وتدعون عليهم وصلوا إلى الفضاء وناموا على سطح القمر وشطروا الذرة وجزأوا الثانية واخترعوا الثورة الرقمية، وأنتم لم تفلحوا إلا بثورة الأعضاء التناسلية، وتتدارسون حتى اليوم طريقة دخول المرحاض وماذا يفسد الوضوء وغير المرأة والكلب الأسود. وعندما اجتهد العلماء توصلوا إلى جهاد النكاح وسفاح القربى وإرضاع الكبير ووداع الزوجة الميتة، وكتبوا كتبا في الطريقة السليمة لنكاح المرأة والبهيمة. أيتها الأمة النائمة، ألا يحق لعقولنا أن تتأثر بهذا الفيض من المعارف والعلوم والتكنولوجيا التي تحيط بنا؟ وهل يتوجب على عقولنا أن تبقى رهينة منذ 1400 عام؟ فعندما نضع الحصان لفلاحة الأرض والحمار للسباق فلن نجني خيرا ولن نكسب الرهان.
Of all of Muhammad's poisonous ideas, the most damaging historically has surely been the notion of Islam being God's perfected religion, the final word from heaven. The corollary to this belief is that Muslims, being the followers of Islam, are superior to people of other faiths or none. This is spelt out explicitly in the Quran, which refers to non-Muslims and non-believers as kuffar, worthy of hellfire for their rejection of Islam. The result of this supremacist mindset has been 1400 years of violence against non-Muslims, a millennial tradition of Islamic imperialism. The Palestinian cleric Abu Taqi al-Dari reminds us of the previous inroads which Muslim imperialists have made into Europe.
منذ فترة قريبة وليست بالبعيدة ننظر بأن المسلمين فتحوا قبل 400 سنة فقط في ظل الدولة العثمانية، فتحوا بولندا، النمسا، وأصبحت على أسوار فيينا دولة الإسلام عاصمة النمسا، ورفع فيها الأذان، ودول الاتحاد السوفيتي كانت جميعها تحت ظل الدولة الإسلامية، بلاد القوقاز وما وراءها. حتى سنة 1644 كان المغول المسلمون يحكمون الصين. في سنة 1526 فتح المسلمون المجر. في سنة 1537 فتحوا أجزاء من إيطاليا وترانكو. في سنة 1543 وصلت جيوش المسلمين في ظل الدولة العثمانية إلى فرنسا، إلى مدينة طالون، وأقاموا فيها مسجد طالون في قلب فرنسا. في 1586 كانت الهند تحكم بالإسلام. إذن يعني هذا بدلل على إيه؟ على أن هذه الأحداث تنبئ أنه بمقدور أمة الإسلام أن تعود كما كانت، وأن يعني تنشر دين الإسلام بإذن الله عز وجل. فإذن القضية بأنه سينشر سلطان الإسلام على العالم كله بإحدى ثلاث: الإسلام أو الجزية، أو نستعين بالله عز وجل ونقاتلهم حتى يخضع العالم جميعا لسلطان.
Contrary to the propaganda of moderates and their political appeasers, jihadist violence is not about taking the Quran out of context, as if there is a fixed context. Rather, it is a logical inference from the incessant demonization of non-Muslims and non-believers which so defines the text. There are dozens of verses in the Quran which vilify those who reject faith, and at least 20 verses which communicate God's direct orders to kill the unbelievers. The cumulative effect of these verses is an annihilatory mindset, which no amount of sanitary interpretations can undo. Indeed, for the Jordanian scholar Ahmed al-Shahruri, the Jews are, quote, more dangerous than AIDS.
أيها الإخوة، نحن نتحدث عن الأوبئة والأمراض التي تصيب الجسد، فماذا عن أوبئة الروح؟ ماذا عن أوبئة الفكر؟ الوباء الذي يصيب الفكر. أنا بدي أسألكم سؤال: هل يشرع لنا أن نتذكر الكورونا لأنها على النار، لأنها تطفو على السطح، وننسى اليهود اللي هم أخطر من الإيدز والكورونا والكوليرا ومن كل أمراض الدنيا؟ إذا أردتم النجاة من هذه الأمراض الفتاكة الظاهرة فعلينا جميعا أن نتذكر الجهاد. هذا الجهاد مطهرة. علينا جميعا أن نتذكر الأقصى. هذا الأقصى إذا علقنا به أرواحنا طهرت أرواحنا وطهرت أجسادنا. من يتذكر الأقصى يحب الحياة والنجاة من الكورونا، مش عشان يتجوز ولا عشان يبني ولا عشان يتعلم، عشان يكون له الفخر في تحرير المسجد الأقصى.
At the time of recording this, in 2020 alone, there have been 1,714 jihadist terror attacks spanning 45 countries. From these attacks, 8,251 people have been killed and 6,083 injured. These are the victims of Muhammad's vision, namely, to establish the Islamic world order through violence. Indeed, when the likes of ISIS execute non-Muslims who refuse to convert to Islam, they are merely emulating its founder. Take, for example, Muhammad's slaughter of the Jews of the Beni Qurayza, as described by Ibn Ishaq. For rejecting his claims to prophethood, Muhammad ordered his soldiers to lay siege to the Beni Qurayza and to execute 600 of their men. The German ex-Muslim Hamid Abdus-Samad takes up this point expertly.
Der IS-Terror mit dem Islam zu tun?
Das hat schon mit dem Islam etwas zu tun. Erstmal der Name, das heißt der Islamische Staat. Diese Bewegung beruft sich auf den Islam, zitiert die Biografie des Propheten, die Art und Weise, wie der Prophet mit den Ungläubigen umgegangen war und sieht das als Vorbild, zitiert mehrere Passagen aus dem Koran, die Gewalt gegen Ungläubige rechtfertigen. Die Enthauptung von Ungläubigen wird auch zweimal im Koran erwähnt. Es ist die Ideologie, der Traum, die IS-Leute versuchen, eine Gemeinde aufzubauen nach dem Vorbild der ersten Gemeinde des Propheten und kopiert eigentlich haargenau das, was im 7. Jahrhundert passiert ist. Eroberungskriege, Verteufelung von Andersgläubigen oder Ungläubigen und Enthauptung von Ungläubigen mit dem Ziel der Weltherrschaft.
Gibt es einen Islam ohne Islamismus?
Wir haben fast 57 islamische Staaten weltweit. Wir haben auch Hunderte von anderen islamischen Gemeinschaften, die in Europa und Nordamerika und Australien leben. Und nirgendwo ist das Islamismus frei. Das heißt, der Islamismus ist ein Bestandteil des Islams und gibt es in jedem islamischen Land und ist eine starke Gruppe. Vielleicht ist es die Minderheit in der Gesellschaft, aber die lautstarkste Minderheit, die aktivste Minderheit in der Gesellschaft und somit ist die Mehrheit für mich irrelevant, weil sie zu wenig dagegen tut. Und wenn es sie wirklich wütend macht, wenn Menschen den Islam so sehen, dann macht mich auch wütend, macht viele Menschen in diesem Lande wütend. Ich glaube gar nicht, dass es eine Minderheit im Netz ist, die diese Position so sieht, sondern das ist über die Hälfte der Menschen in der Gesellschaft. Und sie haben die Nase gestrichen voll von dieser Verniedlichung des Islam in jeder Gelegenheit, Verharmlosung und unter den Teppich kehren. Der Islamismus ist kein Phänomen der letzten 100 Jahre. Der Islamismus ist genauso alt wie die islamische Geschichte selbst. Die ISIS-Leute machen nichts anderes, alles, was Mohammed und seine Gefährten im ersten... lassen Sie mich bitte ausreden, Sie haben fast eine Viertelstunde im Alleingang gesprochen, jetzt rede ich bitte. Ja, ich kenne Ihre Taktik. Sie machen das in jeder Sendung, immer unterbrechen.
Okay,
bleiben
wir bei den Argumenten.
Bei den Argumenten, hat Mohammed seine Gegner enthauptet oder nicht? Steht das nicht in der Biografie des Propheten, in Sahih al-Bukhari oder nicht? Ja oder nein? Sagen
Bukhari,
Sie.
Ja, ich antworte Ihnen. Bukhari und Ibn Ishaq sind für mich nicht der Koran. Wenn diese Überlieferungen dem Koran widersprechen, haben sie für mich keine Gültigkeit.
Im Koran
sie sind
steht,
nicht authentisch. Sie stehen im Widerspruch zum Geist des Korans, deswegen lehne ich sie ab.
Im Koran steht nicht im Surah 47 und wenn ihr auf die Ungläubigen trifft, dann enthauptet sie. Christen erhoben.
Wir gucken da gerade ganz viel auf die Vergangenheit.
Sie haben mich unterbrochen. Warum unterbrechen Sie mich, wenn Sie Frau Hübsch überhaupt nicht unterbrochen haben? Sie hat genug geredet. Nein, entweder rede ich zu Ende oder ich verlasse diese Diskussion. Okay. Weil das wird seit Jahren hier geführt, dass Diskussionen unter den Teppich gekehrt. Nein, das hat wohl damit zu tun, hat mit der islamischen Eroberungsgeschichte zu tun. Damals wurden auch Christen in Syrien und Irak der Wahl gestellt, entweder konvertieren sie zum Islam oder bezahlen sie Kopfsteuer oder werden sie getötet. Und die ISIS-Leute haben das auch fortgeführt. Das ist aber die islamische Geschichte, das steht im Koran. Es gibt 25 Verse im Koran, die direkt Tötungsbefehle von Gott auf Ungläubige stehen. Die Hauptdruck von Ungläubigen werden zweimal im Koran genannt. Und sie kommen hier und sagen, das hat mit dem Islam nichts zu tun. Kein Wunder, dass viele Menschen in diesem Land verunsichert sind. Nicht nur, weil die Terroristen solche Gräueltaten begangen, weil so vermeintlich liberale Muslime das unter den Teppich kehren und somit auch den Fundamentalisten den Rücken stärken. Ich kritisiere, dass man die Angst dieser Menschen immer als Islamophobie bezeichnet, denn Phobie ist eine Krankheit und diese Menschen sind nicht krank, sie haben berechtigte Ängste, wenn sie das sehen, was nicht nur in der islamischen Welt passiert, sondern hier in Deutschland, was sie sehen, was in Großbritannien passiert. Und diesen Leuten sage ich eigentlich, wachsam bleiben, engagiert bleiben, ihre Kritik äußern, auch wenn die Politik das manchmal versucht.
In the Quran, it is stated that the true believer is the one who strives for the hereafter with all due striving. In practice, this means waging war against non-Muslim countries until they submit. The world is thus divided into the House of Islam, Dar al-Islam, and the House of War, Dar al-Harb. That is the purpose of jihad, to establish Islam as the dominant religion. After conquest, a severe judgment is passed on the infidel population. The men who are taken with arms are executed. Their wives and children are sold into slavery. The non-combatants are given three choices: convert to Islam, live in a state of subjugation, or be killed. The Canadian scholar, Eunice Kathrada, doesn't hesitate to affirm jihad as an integral part of the faith.
اللهم انصر المجاهدين في سبيلك في كل مكان. وهنا أتوقف قليلا للشرح. I said, may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala aid the mujahideen in every place. And for those at B'nai Brith, and for those at Memory TV, and for those who are the enemies of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and want to spread that we are making dua for the mujahideen, then I say to you, yes, we are praying for the mujahideen. O Allah, aid those who are striving to establish justice for your sake in every part of the world. And justice means to establish al-Islam. Yes, I know what I am saying, and this is from our religion, this is from our holy texts, if you will, and so whoever likes it can like it, and whoever doesn't like it, it is up to them. Allahumma alayka bi'a'da'ika a'da'i din. Allahumma arina fihim ajaib qudratik. Allahumma alayka bihim fa'innahum la yu'jizun.
In 2014, when ISIS took control of Mosul, they demanded that the Assyrian Christians living in the city convert to Islam, pay the jizya, or face execution, just as it was with the Jews under Nazi Germany and the Abbasid Caliphate. They began marking the homes of Christian residents with the Arabic letter Nun for Nasara, or Christian. In Egypt, Coptic Christians have their churches attacked on a regular basis. In Saudi Arabia, it is forbidden for Christians to build a church or to worship in public. The persecution of Christians in Muslim countries has been well documented by Open Doors, a non-profit organization. Indeed, of the top 50 countries on the 2020 World Watch List, 34 have Muslim majorities. In Pakistan, Christians are increasingly being treated as second-class citizens. In January 2020, Maryam, a Christian woman, was violently expelled from her home by her Muslim neighbours. In April, a 14-year-old girl, Mira Shabazz, was abducted by armed Muslim men in Punjab and forced to marry her captors. In May, it was reported that Christians were being specifically recruited to clean the country's sewers, the job being too dirty for Muslims to do. That same month, it was reported that Christians were being denied COVID-19 aid by mosques and NGOs. The persecution of Christians throughout the Muslim world is captured in this video by Gript Media, published in March of this year.
believers with sticks. Police hammered young men.
Cowardice discovered that her father was a secret believer.
Attacks against Clonskeagh after news spread that the church was to be built.
In this series, we will explore the various manifestations of Islamic supremacism, from the burning of churches to no-go zones. We will make it clear that the problem is not Islamic extremism, as the media spouts, but Islam itself. For if the religion was peaceful in nature, then taking it to its extremes wouldn't be an issue. We believe this is necessary, for Ireland is not immune to the evils of Islam. For many years now, Ireland has been used as a fundraising base for ISIS. The biggest mosque in this country, the Clonskeagh Mosque, is a front for the Muslim Brotherhood, a fascist organisation with the blood of Coptic Christians on their hands. Here is Hussein Halawa, Imam of the Clonskeagh Mosque, calling upon Muslims in July 2013 to restore the Brotherhood to power in Egypt.
اعلموا أن هدهد سليمان غير مملكة بأسره. هدهد سليمان غير مملكة بأسره.
Well, the Sheikh appeals to all the brothers and sisters here, if you can't do anything, do it. And he said not to belittle anything that you can do. And he quoted the example of the Hibwi in the Quran who changed the entire kingdom of Solomon. So if you have any role, fulfill that and never belittle it. We are not going to give it up because we have to give it to generations coming after us as beautiful at the time we enjoyed in the time of Mursi. And we're not going to give, we suffered a lot because the people before us, they accepted subjection and they accepted slavery. And that's why when they handed it to us, we had all these difficulty to clean it up. And we did, and we're going to insist and pass it to our children clean. But let no one belittle the efforts that they're doing. And there's no time anymore to appease the people who are in power. It's time to talk about your right and fulfill your duty. The Sheikh Hussein is asking that we all should exert our efforts and no one should lag behind. If you can write right, if you can use the internet, please use the internet. And if you can speak, also speak. Sheikh said we're going to apply all methods. We're going to contact all organizations, not only in Ireland but also abroad, to restore the rights of our brothers and sisters in Egypt.
Hussein Halawa cannot speak publicly without the approval of radical cleric Yusuf al-Qaradawi, head of the European Council for Fatwa and Research and chairman of the International Union of Muslim Scholars. Qaradawi is a top advocate of suicide bombings, referring to them as, quote, a higher form of jihad for the sake of Allah. He has thus been banned from entering Britain and the United States, but has visited Ireland at least 3 times since September 2000, hosted each time by the Clonskeagh Mosque. Qaradawi also regards the killing of apostates as crucial to the survival of Islam, and has described the Holocaust as God's punishment upon the Jews. Take a look at this video.
الله سلط عليهم طوال التاريخ من يؤدبهم نتيجة إفسادهم. آخر تأديب كان تأديب هتلر، ما فعل بهم وإن كان مبالغوا في الأمر ما بلغوا، ولكن استطاع أن يعني يوقفهم عند حدودهم، وكان هذا أدبا إلهيا، تأديبا إلهيا، عقابا قدريا لهؤلاء. والمرة القادمة إن شاء الله ستكون على أيدي المؤمنين.
Ali Salim is the spokesperson for the Clonskeagh Mosque and Secretary General of the Irish Council of Imams. Salim takes exception to the standard girls' uniform in Irish schools and disputes that the 2005 London bombings were carried out by Muslims. Salim also expresses doubts about the events of September 11th. He refuses to describe Osama bin Laden as a terrorist, saying that he would have to have met him. Salim also lobbies for female genital mutilation to be decriminalised, and has stated that Sharia should rule in Ireland once there is a Muslim majority. Given that the penalty for apostasy is death, we can safely assume that if Salim had his way, ex-Muslims like us would be executed. We must also realise that Irish citizens have already died from Islamic terror. In June 2015, 3 Irish nationals were killed by a jihadist attack in Tunisia. In June 2018, university professor John Dowling was stabbed to death in Paris by a Pakistani national. In January 2018, Yosuke Sasaki was stabbed to death by Mohammed Marai in Dundalk. Outrageously, despite screaming Allahu Akbar as he took Sasaki's life, Marai would escape a murder conviction on the grounds of insanity. These atrocities have been fueled by the belief that non-Muslims, by not accepting Islam, are degenerate kuffar. In an interview for the BBC in August 2005, the British preacher Anjem Chowdhury expresses these sentiments candidly.
At the end of the day, innocent people, when we say innocent people, we mean Muslims. As far as non-Muslims are concerned, they have not accepted Islam. As far as we're concerned, that is a crime against God.
I want to be clear about what you're saying. This is very important. You're saying only Muslims can count as innocent people.
As far as Muslims are concerned, you're innocent if you are a Muslim, then you're innocent in the eyes of God. If you are non-Muslim, then you're guilty of not believing in God. Yes, there were many victims.
You're guilty.
Are
you seriously suggesting that everybody on those tube trains and on that bus in London on July the 7th was in some way a legitimate target?
You don't allow me to answer the question fully, Stephen. You're never going to get to the bottom of it. Let me begin by saying, as a Muslim, you must have allegiance where the Sharia says that you have allegiance. You must hate and love for the sake of Allah. You must praise and dispraise for what the Sharia says, you praise and dispraise. So as a Muslim, I must support my Muslim brothers and sisters, wherever they are in the world. I must have allegiance with them. I must cooperate with them. I must love them. And similarly, on the other hand, I must have hatred towards everything which is non-Islam.
We also know that the 2017 London Bridge attacks, which killed 8 people and injured 48 others, were originally meant for Dublin. Indeed, in September 2017, it was revealed that Kareem Muhssin and Rashid Redwan, the perpetrators of the attacks, had set their sights on a well-known Dublin landmark. According to Alia, a Muslim convert who used to know Kareem Muhssin, the jihadists were convinced to alter their plans by a third party in the UK, who believed that Ireland would suit ISIS better as a fundraising base. Redwan lived in Rathmines for a number of years. He was granted residency in the EU after marrying a British woman in Dublin. To quote Paul Williams from the Sunday Independent, quote, Khurram Shahzad Butt and Rashid Redwan, who together with a third accomplice were shot dead by police during the London Bridge attack, carried out reconnaissance 2 years ago on a number of high-profile locations in Dublin that they had identified as potential targets. But 27, and 31-year-old Redwan, who was married to an Irish woman and lived in Dublin for a number of years, actively discussed carrying out an attack in the capital, according to reliable sources, including an Irish woman who became radicalised after converting to Islam. Now, inevitably, if a terror attack were to happen in Ireland, the Marxist left would be quick to rationalise it, being inclined to attribute pure motives to violence against the capitalist West. The likes of Mick Wallace and Claire Daly would point to American warplanes refuelling at Shannon Airport. But of course, for the jihadist, these grievances have nothing to do with Muslims being killed. Rather, what angers them is the defeat of their imperialist utopia. Indeed, if these people really cared about the welfare of Muslims, they would be taking up arms against ISIS, whose victims have overwhelmingly been other Muslims. Their hatred of the West, just like their hatred of Shia Muslims and moderate Sunnis, is religious to the core, as Abu Walid makes perfectly clear.
So what did Allah say about the Nabi Muhammad? He said, Muhammad Rasulullah وَالَّذِينَ مَعَهُ أَشِدَّاءَ عَلَى الْكُفَّارِ رُحَمَاءُ بَيْنَهُم. Muhammad Rasulullah and those with him, they are what? Compassionate towards the kuffar? No, they are harsh towards the kuffar. Ruhana bainahum, and merciful towards the believers. Account all of. So this is what we need to understand. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He said more than that. Talking about this wala and bara within the Quran. Allah, He said in the ayah, He said you love them, but you know what? They don't love you. Talking about who? Talking about those radical fundamentalists. You love them, they don't love you. No. Talking about the kafir. More than that, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He said they wish for you to become kafir. How? By giving you money, by funding you, giving you a pool table, giving you a center, giving you a voice, saying, don't worry, we'll give you a little bit of money, you just keep quiet about Islam, talk about, just become moderate, chocolate, coconut Muslim. Allah, He said, they wish for you to become kafir. Why? So that you can become equal, like them. And this is what the Sahaba, they understood, that the kuffar, they wish for you to leave your deen. They wish for you to become kafir like them, so that they can oppress you, so they can have authority over you. More than that, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He said, قَدْ بَغْدَى بَغْدَاءِ مِنْ إِفْوَاهِهِمْ وَمَا تُقْصِدُونَهُمْ أَكْبَرُ قَدْ بَيْنَ لَكُمْ آيَاتِي إِن كُنْتُمْ تَعْقِلُونَ. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He said, and rank hatred has appeared from their mouths. Talking about the kafir, the one you want to show compassion and love and peace with. But what they hide inside their hearts for you is far worse. And you know what Imam Ali, he said, just in case somebody says, but that was 1400 years ago. How can you apply this ayah today? Imam Ali, he said, when we read the Quran, we read it as if the ayah just come down today. Subhanallah. Is this not the haqq? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, my dear brothers, He laid down the deen so clear for us. وَهَدَيْنَهُ نَجْدَيْنِ. The right path and the wrong path are so distinguished and so clear from each other. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He made distinction between us and the disbelievers. He said in the ayah, الَّذِينَ آمَنُوا يُقَاتِلُونَ فِي سَبِيلِ اللَّهِ وَالَّذِينَ كَفَرُوا يُقَاتِلُونَ فِي سَبِيلِ الطَّاغُوتِ. That the believers, they fight for the sake of Allah. And the kuffar, they fight for the sake of Taghut. For the Americans, for the British. For those kuffar who want to oppress Islam. For those kuffar who want to sell out, who want to change your deen and try and reintroduce it as a new, compassionate way of life. More than that, we'll push it further. Umar al-Faruq, he said, نَحْنُ قَوْمًا أَعِزَّ اللَّهُ وَالْإِسْلَامِ. He said, we are a qawm who Allah, He dignified us with Islam. You know what that means? Al-Islam ya'lu wa la yu'la alayh. Islam is superior and it can never be surpassed. Meaning our deen is always better than the deen of the kafir.
For over a decade, Ireland has served as a transit hub for jihadist terror. In 2013, a study led by Professor Peter Newman of King's College London found that per capita, Ireland was the biggest contributor of ISIS militants in all of Europe. This has been largely facilitated by the jihadist group Liwa al-Ummah, founded by Mehdi al-Harati, an Irish citizen of Libyan descent. Among the dead are the Egyptian-born Hudhayfa el-Sayed, the Libyan-born Shamsuddin Gaiden, the Jordanian-born Ala Sima, and the Libyan-born Hisham el-Habash. These and other youths would have been selected for their performance at training camps held in the Wicklow Mountains. Writing for The Independent in January 2015, Paul Williams provides some details on these camps. Quote, prospective recruits for selection as Islamist fighters have been sent on training camps in the remote areas in the Leinster region. One training camp is reported to have taken place in recent weeks. Those taking part, young men aged between their late teens and early 20s, were being assessed for their mental and physical strength to be jihadis. The young men were made to endure the hardships of living rough in mountainous terrain, including swimming in frozen lakes and camping under the elements. No weapons or military tactics were used, and no laws were broken, a security source said. Those selected are taken aside for more rigorous indoctrination and sent abroad to join ISIS in Syria. Unquote. The radicalization of Muslim youth has been driven in no small part by Islamic student societies. Indeed, the Muslim Student Association of Trinity College Dublin, one of the largest in Ireland, has often been host to jihadist preachers. One example would be Haytham al-Haddad, a former judge on the Islamic Sharia Council, who was hosted by Trinity in March 2013. In Arabic, Haddad laments the refusal of Muslim countries to engage in offensive warfare. He has referred to homosexuality as a scourge and a criminal act, and calls for adulterers to be stoned to death. Haddad also supports the death penalty for ex-Muslims, as is made clear in this video when he is challenged by an Iranian convert to Christianity.
Your name?
My name is Damon Golris. Thank you for coming here. There are some people who think you are really a charlatan. I think you're also brave too. I've listened to you during your visit in Holland, and I've read the Quran, and I can tell you, according to the Quran, according also to your words, and you're not saying it in Beirut or in Kabul or in Riyadh or in Tehran, but you're saying it in London, in the Al-Islamia Mosque in London, that the punishment for the apostate, the punishment for who leaves the Islam is capital punishment. That the blood of those people, like me, because that blood is halal. I am your enemy because of three things. I have left Islam. My blood is halal. I'm an Iranian, I'm not Arab.
This is for language.
Okay. No.
What are you talking about, man?
And your statement is, or your question is?
No, okay. That's what I mean. That's what I mean. My question is very simple. What do you think about me?
Okay, that's a very clear question. You left Islam, and what do you think? What do you think about it?
I said that apostasy, deserves, once the conditions are met, deserves capital punishment in an Islamic state, and I can say this openly. I'm not here to hide it. This. In every single legal system, there is a capital punishment. Do you agree or not? No. And see, in Britain, in many, just a minute, please.
One moment. I can get back to you.
In Britain, in many Western countries, in America, there is a capital punishment for treason. In Britain, I'm from Britain.
We don't have capital punishment in Holland.
Okay, maybe. But in Britain, as well as many European countries, there is something called the treason, and the punishment for treason is a capital punishment. In Britain, we have something called shoot to kill. Even if you suspect that the person is a threat, you will kill him.
So Mr. Al,
there is killing.
Just to get it clear.
That sometimes killing is justified.
Well, I said robbing, sometimes stealing, but there's a difference. But maybe sometimes killing is justified. I don't know. But you say killing is justified for leaving the truth, Islam. Yeah.
In Ireland, some student groups have actually functioned as jihadist cells. In October 2019, it was reported that medical students Mohammed Mahainuddin and Mustafa El-Hayani, Vice Auditor and Events Coordinator of the NUIG Islamic Society, had died for ISIS in Syria and Iraq, respectively. Long before the war in Syria, Muslims from Ireland were joining up with Al-Qaeda in Iraq. All the way back in 2006, Ali al-Saleh, Imam of the Shia Mosque in Milltown, told RTE that at least 11 jihadists in Iraq had been found to be carrying Irish documents. Saleh also explained that elements of the Muslim community were openly celebrating the atrocities committed by Al-Qaeda.
We cannot deny that there is fundamentalism. This is threatening our life. If we are the Muslim part of this society, the Irish society, it is not good to deny it. They are celebrating sometimes some terrorist act in Iraq, and some people, they hear the word of very cool. Here in Dublin,
the people in Dublin celebrating the atrocities as they happen in Iraq.
Yes, frankly and openly. Some Al-Qaeda cells are using Europe country as safe haven. If you use European document you can get anywhere in the world. So some people count from how many person came from through Italy, how many person came through Ireland, how many person came from Britain. So they have this sort of figure that 11 person till now have been killed in Iraq, and they are carrying Irish documents.
11 people came from Ireland.
At least, not at least.
The violent nature of mainstream Islam is why we only ever see Shia Muslims, who make up just 10% of the global Muslim population and who are widely regarded as the enemy within, demonstrating against ISIS. Sunni Muslims know that ultimately ISIS are merely following the teachings of Ibn Taymiyyah, who is revered as a mujaddid, that is, one who brings renewal to the faith. Indeed, ISIS frequently refer to Ibn Taymiyyah in their publications, not least when it comes to suicide bombings and the rewards for martyrs. In the Hadith, these rewards are spelled out. Martyrs will be compensated with 72 wives and a penis which never goes soft. For Ibn Taymiyyah, suicidal actions were perfectly legitimate as a means of warfare. To quote from Majmu al-Fatawa, quote, Muslim has narrated in his Sahih the story of the people of the trenches, in which the boy ordered his own killing for the benefit of the religion. Hence, the 4 Imams have allowed a Muslim to immerse himself in the enemy ranks, even if he is reasonably certain that they will kill him, provided there is benefit in that for the Muslims. Unquote. The idea that ISIS exists on the fringes of Islam, that most Muslims would never dream of imposing their faith on others, is a figment of the imagination. This is backed up by countless studies of Muslim attitudes to Western freedoms. In May 2020, the Ministry of Justice in Denmark published an 800-page report on Danish attitudes to free speech. Of the Muslims surveyed, 76% think that criticizing Islam should be illegal and punishable. Naturally, this intolerance is shared by the Muslim community in Ireland. The first ever poll of Irish Muslims was taken in December 2006. The results of this poll, despite the innocent-sounding headline, make for a sobering read. These are the most worrying statistics. 1. Less than 30% of Irish Muslims agree to children being raised in marriages with mixed religious influences. 2. 82% of Irish Muslims are opposed to any restrictions on women wearing the veil to work. 3. 36% of Irish Muslims would prefer Ireland to be ruled under Sharia. And 4. 57% of young Irish Muslims believe Ireland should become an Islamic state. These are facts which are ignored by our political establishment, who are more concerned with avoiding the charge of Islamophobia. Indeed, as I record this, the Irish government is busy drafting new laws designed to limit free speech. Under these so-called hate speech laws, if someone is merely perceived to be inciting hatred, this will actually be sufficient for the Gardaí to investigate them. Thus, instead of the burden being on the accuser to prove their claims, the burden will be on the accused to disprove them. Needless to say, this is totalitarian, a complete reversal of the presumption of innocence, serving only to empower the fascists in our midst. For the avoidance of doubt, here is the working definition of hate crime featured on the Gardaí website. Quote, any criminal offence which is perceived by the victim or any other person to, in whole or in part, be motivated by hostility or prejudice based on actual or perceived age, disability, race, colour, nationality, ethnicity, religion, sexual orientation, or gender. Unquote. The capitulation of our political establishment to Islam was demonstrated vividly in July of this year with the Muslim occupation of Croke Park. To be clear, this was the use of our national stadium as a mosque, organised by supporters of Hamas, who boast of bringing an even bigger crowd next year. And yet, despite all of this, the Irish government would celebrate this event as a symbol of unity. Witness also the mass refusal of TDs to sign our petition to legalise apostasy, that is, to abolish the death penalty for leaving Islam, which is upheld by at least 10 Muslim-majority countries. Indeed, since receiving our petition in mid-September, out of 160 TDs, only 2 have bothered to sign it. In the UK, this systemic neglect of ex-Muslims has meant that apostates are effectively at the mercy of Sharia enforcers. Consider the case of Nisar Hussain, a convert to Christianity and a good friend of ours. In November 2015, Nisar was savagely beaten by Muslim vigilantes in Bradford, who had learned of his apostasy. The cowardice of the British police is such that rather than any of Nisar's assailants being brought to justice, he was told by a sergeant to, quote, stop being a crusader and made to leave the area. His family were escorted out under armed guard. This is what is coming to Ireland if we allow areas like Balbriggan and Tyrrellstown to be taken over by delinquents from Muslim-majority countries. This is a summary of Nisar's ordeal, as documented by Vice.
This is Nisar Hussain, a father of 6. In November last year, he was going to his car when this happened. 2 hooded men brutally beat him to the ground. He was left with broken bones and hospitalized. He says he was attacked because he left the faith of Islam and converted to Christianity. Since then, he says he's faced continual harassment from his local Muslim community in the north of England. In the months leading up to the attack, Mr. Hussain placed hidden cameras around his home, filming what he felt were threats against him and his family.
Do you feel like it's been an active religious hate campaign to cleanse you out, essentially?
Yeah, without a shadow of a doubt, actually, because as soon as my conversion seems to have spread like wildfire, and then before you know it, you're shunned, isolated, and then treated with contempt. Out of 2000 onwards, had 3 cars written off, almost daily abuse, intimidation, harassment, bricks thrown through the bay window, sworn at, spat at. My wife, especially with my daughters, being intimidated and harassed, and then things are escalated to such a degree that you literally are having to flee for your lives, actually. The attack was actually very sudden, and I just saw this thug just swing this pickaxe handle straight for my head, and I put my hand up to block it, actually, and my hand suffered fractures, and I reeled backwards and ended up falling and then being concussed, being pummeled, and I suffered a fracture to my kneecap. We have lived with death threats and threats to our welfare and safety. I never really envisaged it would come in such a fashion just outside my front gate.
But of course, ex-Muslims are not the only victims of this lynch mob mentality. Rather, anyone who is perceived to insult Islam is in the firing line. In mid-October, Samuel Paty, a French schoolteacher, was beheaded for showing cartoons of Muhammad to his pupils. The killer, an 18-year-old Muslim of Chechen descent, learned of Samuel because his information was shared online by other Muslims. Indeed, it was Samuel's own pupils who pointed him out to the killer. This is how Islam conditions its adherents, to silence any criticism of Muhammad with murderous violence. Take a look at this news report, explaining how Samuel's murder was a collaborative effort.
As France mourns the brutal killing of Samuel Paty, France's anti-terrorism prosecutor unveiling accusations against 7 people, including 2 minors aged 14 and 15.
This identification was only possible with the help of students from the school. They identified him in exchange for payment.
The prosecutor's office says the teens were paid 350 euros to identify Paty, and surveillance footage shows the students pointing out the teacher as he left school. After decapitating the teacher, the 18-year-old attacker was shot dead by police. Still in custody, a parent who launched a campaign on social media against Pati, outraged that the teacher showed cartoons of the Prophet Muhammad in his civics class. Prosecutors confirming that the killer had made contact with that parent, and also alleging the man's daughter was homesick on the day in question and told her father things that weren't true. Also in contact with the girl's father, Franco-Moroccan activist Adel Hakim Sefroui, accused of accompanying him to the school to demand Pati be fired. Pati's killing has shocked France, carrying echoes of the attack 5 years ago on the offices of satirical magazine Charlie Hebdo after it published cartoons of the Prophet Muhammad.
In raising these issues, we want to give ordinary Irish people the confidence to criticize Islam, to rise above the Orwellian propaganda of Islamophobia. The fact is that Islam mandates death for apostates and for non-Muslims who don't pay the jizya. It calls for homosexuals to be thrown off tall buildings, and for those who have sex outside of marriage to be stoned to death. It forbids alcohol entirely, and reduces women to the status of slaves. We can either challenge these ideas, or continue sleepwalking into the belly of the beast. We can either have a liberal society where people are free to be themselves, or we can have Sharia patrols on the streets of Dublin. Take a look at this video, filmed in East London.
Rumeysa and Chowdhury both live in East London, which is home to one of the largest Muslim populations in the UK. In one part of town, Rumeysa and his associates have set up so-called Sharia patrols to go out and discourage behavior that they deem un-Islamic.
There's some guys there.
On this night, they stopped to talk to a couple of non-Muslim men who were in a park drinking beer, which is forbidden under Islam.
So we're just reminding the community about staying safe. And in this area, there's a lot of gambling that goes on, a lot of alcohol drinking, and it leads to a lot of problems. So we advise you, and we advise anyone you see, to stay away from these things.
Get the prostitutes off our streets!
But the patrols are not always so friendly. Online clips give a very different picture. A woman in a short skirt is abused.
Vigilante cannot dress like that in Muslim area.
I'm so appalled.
We don't care if you're appalled at all. Muslim patrols.
It's Great Britain.
This we don't care. It's not so Great Britain. You need to get out of it.
A man the patrol thinks is gay is insulted.
Get out of here quicker then. You're dirty, mate. You're a gay, mate. Get out of here, mate.
In the night time, it turns into a very ugly place like many of the...
Walking through London with Rumeysa, you experience an alternate reality where there is no compromise and all conversations are one-sided.
Ultimately, I want to see every single woman in this country covered from head to toe. I want to see the hand of the thief cut. I want to see adulterers stoned to death. I want to see Sharia law in Europe, and I want to see it in America as well. I believe our patrols are a means to an end.
To oppose this manifest thuggery, we must not be cowed by the charge of racism. Indeed, if we are going to talk about racism, then the shoe is on the other foot. In the Middle East, the standard term for a black person is abd, Arabic for slave. In his seminal work, Race and Culture, Thomas Sowell estimates that 14 million sub-Saharan Africans were enslaved by Islam. While slavery was officially outlawed in Saudi Arabia in 1962, clandestine dealings continue to the present day, as they do in Libya, Yemen, and other Muslim countries. It is well known that Qatar and Dubai use Ethiopian slaves to build their stadiums. In Sudan, slave raiding was endorsed by Omar al-Bashir to destroy Christian opposition to his rule. To quote Charles Jacobs from October 2002, quote, "In Khartoum, a Taliban-like Muslim regime is waging a self-declared jihad on African Christians and followers of tribal faiths in South Sudan. Non-Arab African Muslims are also targeted for devastation. 2 million people have been killed, more than in Bosnia, Kosovo, Somalia, Haiti, Rwanda, and Burundi combined. Tens of thousands have been displaced, and 100,000, according to the US Committee on Refugees, forcibly starved. Western lack of interest is all the more stunning, as Khartoum's onslaught has rekindled the trade in black slaves, halted, mostly, a century ago by the British abolitionists. Arab militias storm African villages, kill the men, and enslave the women and children. In these pogroms, after the men are slaughtered, the women, girls, and boys are gang-raped, or they have their throats slit for resisting. The terrorized survivors are marched northward and distributed to Arab masters, the women to become concubines, the girls domestics, and the boys goat herders." Unquote. This is the legacy of Muhammad, who never lifted a finger to abolish slavery. On the contrary, he was a slave trader himself, and codified slavery as an Islamic practice. For example, he decreed that 2 black slaves is the equivalent of 1 non-black slave. The racism of Muhammad is on full display in the Hadith, in which he describes Ethiopian men as having heads like raisins and interprets the appearance of a black woman as an omen of an epidemic. It should thus come as no surprise that at the close of the Hajj pilgrimage each year, black pilgrims who have been trampled to death are piled on top of each other like yesterday's garbage. The racism of the Arab world is summed up well in this video.
Between the 7th and 19th century, Arab traders captured millions of African slaves and shipped them out of the continent. Slavery was not formally abolished in the Arab Gulf countries until 1970. Many contend a modern form of slavery still exists there today. The Arabic word for slave, abd, is commonly used as a racial slur. The Middle East history of slavery, the casual racism, particularly against Sudanese or Nubian people from the south of Egypt, and the depictions of black Arabs on screen are interwoven. But, as many Arabs often say, the context is different. Is it really fair to compare Arab slavery and blackface with their Western counterparts?
I am sure that when people object to the idea that blackface is offensive in the Middle East, they're saying we are not talking about the American South, we are not talking about plantation slavery, we are not talking about the same kind of abuses or the same scale that happened in the southern United States. However, the slave trade in the Middle East was huge, and the cultural impact of this slave trade has everything to do with blackface in the Middle East.
Nobody has ever discussed any of that, and nobody has ever acknowledged this very dark and shameful history. So, like, we keep shaming the Americans and the Europeans for whenever they do like anything racist, but at least they've somewhat come in terms with their dark history, or at least they're trying to confront it and face it head on. Whereas there is no acknowledgement whatsoever of our shameful role of what happened to Africans earlier in those centuries, at these times.
In the Arab world, we have a range of skin colors from black to very pale white. Our preferences as Arabs, which align with the standards around the world, is that the whiter someone is, the more attractive they are. I have personally received a lot of comments, like, "The night has come early," or I get called Shikabala. Shikabala is a black footballer, and I shouldn't be offended, but the name is used in a derogatory manner to offend me. There are lots of sexual remarks related to black stereotypes. People have pulled my hair, spit on me, and thrown things at me. People talk about me as though I don't understand Arabic, as though I don't know they are commenting about me.
To stop the advance of Islamofascism, we must dramatically curb Muslim immigration. This is something which other European countries have begun to realize. Indeed, after the conquest of Mecca, Muhammad decreed that migration had been superseded by jihad. Thus, whether or not they are conscious of it, all Muslims who emigrate to the West carry the imperative to spread Islam. Those who are most conscious of this imperative become community leaders. One example would be Omar al-Qadri, Imam of the Al-Mustafa Islamic Center in Blanchardstown. In this video, Qadri urges Muslim immigrants to exploit Ireland for its economic benefits, stating that the best migration is for Allah.
There is nothing wrong in
in coming in this country for fulus, for finances. Nothing wrong. Anybody said that's wrong? He doesn't know Islam. It's only wrong if you come for fulus and for that you give up your identity, your deen, your Islam. That is haram. That is forbidden. Then you should be ashamed. If you come here and you say, I am Qadiani, I am a Mirzai in Pakistan and they are killing me and you are lying, that's haram. You're giving up your religion. But if you're coming in as an asylum seeker for any other reason, you're not giving up your identity. You are proudly Muslim. And you come here, even for passport, khair, it's perfectly fine. The best migration is for Allah and His Rasul sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. But anything else, it's not haram. It's not forbidden.
The jihadist imperative manifests itself through demands for Sharia courts, through the use of public spaces as mosques, through attacks on freedom of speech, and through the sexual abuse of young women. Indeed, the rape of vulnerable women by Muslim grooming gangs in the UK is arguably the most appalling scandal of our time, not least because the police and the government have done their utmost to cover it up. This was the case in Rotherham. To avoid causing offence to the Muslim community, over 3 decades, the police turned a blind eye to the rape of 1,400 young women. On a national scale, almost 19,000 children are estimated to have been abused by these gangs. There are some who question whether we should frame this issue in terms of Islam, but the plain truth is that Muhammad and his successors took sex slaves. In the Quran, these are referred to as those whom your right hand possesses. In the Hadith, it is described how Muhammad married Aisha at the age of 6 and consummated the marriage when she was 9. Given that Muhammad is held up as the best example for Muslims to follow, it is not surprising that we have rape gangs with a predilection for young women. The problem is spelled out by the victims of these gangs, as well as some genuine moderates from within the Muslim community. This is a clip from BBC Newsnight, aired in January of this year.
Being in Rotherham is a reminder of the horrific scale of what happened in this town. 1,400 children were raped, abused, trafficked, beaten, passed around. And that astounding number is believed to be a conservative estimate.
This grooming gang survivor calls what happened to her anti-Western religious and racist abuse.
When I was a victim, I was raped multiple times, I was beaten, I was tortured, and throughout all of that I was constantly being racially abused. There was a constant barrage of, you're a white slag, you're a white whore, you're a fucking gory, which is the Pakistani word for white person. So the racist abuse was non-stop. The religious abuse is real. I was taught it as a type of othering, like our Pakistani girls are good and pure and they cover themselves, they're virgins till they're married, but white girls are trash, they're whores, they all sleep with hundreds of men, they're all worthless. I don't think it's good to hide this information.
The problem here is that these people have been raised up to see the non-Muslim community as kafir, as infidel, as unworthy of living on God's earth, etc., etc. When you categorize people as kafir, non-believer, then use this word in a derogatory way, then you start to underrate them and look at them as less a human being, or perhaps not a human being, not a people worthy of respect, and therefore you could do anything.
The jihadist imperative also manifests itself through the halal industry. This is reflected in the words of Mustafa Serik, the Grand Mufti of Bosnia, who has openly stated that Muslims should conquer the world through the halal movement. In Ireland, the halal industry is overseen by the self-styled Department of Halal Certification, chaired by Umar al-Qadri. To be awarded Halal certification, businesses must apply to the department and successfully complete a series of audits. Naturally, the application fee and all subsequent monies are used to further the advancement of Islam. Halal butchers operate with impunity throughout Ireland. This is a national disgrace, for the brutality of halal slaughter is well known. Indeed, the practice has been banned in Denmark and other European countries with a strong concern for animal welfare. In order for meat to be classified as halal, the animal must be slaughtered by a sane adult Muslim in the name of Allah. Otherwise, the meat is impure. Knowing that non-Muslims won't accept this supremacist logic, the apologist for Islam tries to argue that halal is actually about minimizing suffering. However, a cursory glance at the process shows this to be false. The animal has its throat slit and bleeds out until it dies. Nothing is done to minimize pain. The jihadist imperative can also be seen in the demands of Muslim parents for public schools to close on Islamic holidays and for the establishment of their own schools to keep their children from learning about other religions. Here in Ireland, the latter function is performed by the Muslim National School, located on the same site as the Clonskeagh Mosque. The Muslim National School indoctrinates children of Muslim parents with all manner of wicked ideas. I should know, as I attended the school for 8 years. While there, I was warned not to take Christians or Jews as my friends, for the Quran says that they are friends only unto themselves. I was also warned not to neglect my prayers, or Satan would pour boiling water over my head. Like other primary schools in the country, the Muslim National School teaches the Irish curriculum for the natural sciences and the humanities. This is a condition which must be met for the school to be recognised and funded by the Department of Education. However, the teaching of religion is left entirely to the school administration, without any interference from the department. Thus, the Muslim teachers are free to teach whatever they want, some of whom are in bed with the far left. This is a picture of Asiya Al-Tawash, now chairperson of the Muslim Primary Education Board, being hosted in August 2008 by the Socialist Workers' Party, who support Hezbollah and other jihadist groups. In the UK, it's the same story. Islamic schools teach the national curriculum, but have free rein when it comes to religious instruction. Unsurprisingly, many of these schools have been found to be promoting jihadist values. Indeed, some of these schools use textbooks supplied by Saudi Arabia, which instruct students on how to amputate the hands and feet of thieves with chilling precision. These books also promote belief in a global Jewish conspiracy and teach that Christianity is an invalid and perverted religion. From Canada to Australia, Muslim schools are using taxpayers' money to indoctrinate children with barbaric ideas. Take a look at this video.
But he's Muslim and he get out of Islam. He doesn't want any more. What we're going to do? Kill. Yeah, qatl, kill. Then have to be killed. You understand? We're talking about Islam. For the had the zina, what is the law of this? Until he died. And the one who is not married, he never dies. Now, with 100 if someone make them like a man, a woman like a man, you understand this? The punishment is kill them from the highest place. And not going to be like animals, living like animals, or to be like the people of Lut. We have to take the had is to kill them.
The punishment of throw them from the highest point and then stone them. Then we reduced him to the lowest of the low. So if you throw someone off a mountain, you are reducing him to the lowest of the low because they're falling off from a high place.
It's not enough that you worship Allah, you have to also, in our heart, hate what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, please to Allah, and love what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. hate what displeased to Allah, especially when living with this country that's non-Muslim.
Verily, we are free from you, and whatever you worship besides Allah, we have rejected you, and there has appeared between us and you hostility and hatred forever until you believe in Allah alone.
You understand, sister? Islam is the tabarruk min al-shirk wa ahli, the people who do the shirk. Any questions?
To be good friend, give them all about our secret, understand? But you have to be fair with them. That is not allowed. Because the wala is only to Muslim, not to the kafir.
And the message, the Quran, came to confirm the truth in the previous scriptures. And we feel nothing sometimes going past the church. What they say with their tongues is so vile and disgusting. It's an abomination.
Not content with establishing their own schools, jihadists have infiltrated Christian schools in Ireland. In 2006, an RTE primetime documentary revealed that Ismail Kotwal, Imam of the Blackpits Mosque, who has described the Taliban as a model for the rest of the world, had been employed by De La Salle College Churchtown to teach Islam. I remember this vividly as a student of the college at the time. In the documentary, we learn that during these classes, Kotwal referred to Osama bin Laden as a great leader, causing 2 Shia students to walk out in anger. Kotwal would subsequently accuse RTE of evil intentions and twisting his words. However, during the program, Kotwal openly praises bin Laden as a God-fearing man.
The Taliban did a good job, but of course they had some weaknesses. They needed support. They needed time. And it was very sad that they did not get that support. But still, it was a model for the rest of the world.
Do you think that there could be any good reason why the Taliban should have handed over Osama bin Laden to America?
No, of course not. Why? Show some proof, show some evidence. Yes, of course, take him. We'll punish him as well. But without proof, why?
You really believe that there's no hard evidence to show that Osama bin Laden was behind 9/11?
No evidence at all. There's no evidence.
How have you tried to explain this to your own students when they say, well, listen, that guy is a terrorist?
No, my students don't say that. My students don't say he's a terrorist.
But surely they would have read and thought that he...
No, because they know that when we teach a very balanced thing and we put all the pros and cons, at the same time we put this, that they say this, but can we trust them, what they are saying? Osama bin Laden, look at him. His appearance is like Prophet Muhammad. You can see it in his face. He's a good, God-fearing man.
What you say to your students is that Osama bin Laden, he is in the same mold.
The best, I will very close. We have been told in the Quran that Prophet Muhammad's life is the best example. Whoever is closest to him is a better person. And these people, Mullah Umar, Osama bin Laden, have shown it practically.
You say that he's essentially a decent man and that there is no proof, etc. People still, they find that extremely difficult to understand.
Who finds it difficult?
I think people will.
No, Muslims don't. Non-Muslims will. Who cares? I don't accept them to understand. Muslims will take this message. When I say to them, Osama bin Laden or Mullah Umar or anybody else, what good is inside them is good.
The jihadist imperative also manifests itself through Islamic charities, many of which have been found to support terrorism. Indeed, we must understand that when groups like Muslim Sisters of Era offer help to the homeless, what they are really trying to do is to win people over to Islam. The Taliban do the exact same thing in Afghanistan. To win sympathy for their cause, they are often the first to assist victims of earthquakes. This is how Islam sustains itself, by preying on the most vulnerable, by making them feel part of a community. These people have no concept of genuine morality, of doing good for goodness sake. All they care about is that sweet heavenly reward for bringing people to Islam. A further manifestation of the jihadist imperative can be seen in the construction of mosques with enormous minarets, explicitly designed to announce the Adhan over loudspeakers. Indeed, it is important to realize that the Adhan is more than just a call to prayer. It is a supremacist declaration that there is no God but Allah and that Muhammad is his prophet. Having the Adhan blare out over loudspeakers, especially in a majority non-Muslim country, is unquestionably a form of coercion. Recognizing this, a group of residents in Lucan have taken a stand against the proposed mosque in the area, which of course will include a minaret on its premises. The mosque's backers claim that they have no intention of using the minaret to announce the Adhan. This is a barefaced lie, for why build the minaret at all then? The truth is that they absolutely intend to use it once the Muslim population in Lucan is large enough to quell any opposition. This is the tried and tested strategy for Muslims to get what they want. They have been given permission to do so by Dublin City Council, who, in their willful ignorance of the imperial nature of Islam, have actually likened the Adhan to church bells. In Toronto, the capitulation of local authorities to Islam means that non-Muslims must endure this noise pollution 5 times a day. Take a look at this video.
Subhanallah.
Among Muslims, the birth rate is invariably higher than that of non-Muslims. This is what enables Muslim populations in Europe to grow so rapidly. Indeed, it is now estimated that by 2043, Islam will be the second largest religion in Ireland. This penchant for breeding is rooted in imperialism, for in the Hadith, Muhammad stresses that in order for Muslims to outnumber their enemies, they should marry women who are prolific. This desire for conquest is openly expressed by Sheikh Muhammad Ayed, Imam of the Al-Aqsa Mosque in Jerusalem. In a blistering speech from September 2015, Ayed implores Muslim refugees to breed with Europeans in order to take over the continent.
كذلك أوروبا كل أقطارها كلهم تقطر قلوبهم حقدا على المسلمين يتمنون لنا الموت ولكنهم فقدوا إخصابهم ويبحثون عن إخصاب عندنا. سنخصبهم وسوف ننزل وسوف ننجب منهم، لأننا سوف نفتح بلادهم رغم أنوفكم يا أيها الألمان، يا أيها الأمريكان، يا أيها الفرنسيون، يا أيها الطليان، يا كل من على وزن الطليان. خذوا اللاجئين، سنطلبهم منكم قريبا باسم دولة الخلافة القادمة، وسنقول لكم هؤلاء أبناؤنا أرسلوهم أو نرسل لكم جيوش.
Of course, the jihadist imperative also extends to electoral politics. In the Netherlands, we now have Islamist political parties whose stated goal is to implement Sharia. In Belgium, the Islam Party has called for men and women to be separated on public transport and for the wearing of headscarves to be made mandatory. These organizations are part of a renewed push for Europe to be ruled under Sharia. The strategy for this was devised by the Islamic Council of Europe in 1980. In his book, Muslim Minorities in the World Today, Ali Khatani states that Muslims should strive to obtain political recognition and use this power to change the nation as a whole. Quote, "Once the community is well organized, its leaders should strive to seek the recognition by the authorities of Muslims as a religious community which has the right to maintain its characteristics. Once recognized, the community should continue to request the same rights as the other religious communities enjoy in the country. Eventually, the community may seek to gain political rights as a constituent community of the nation. Once these rights are obtained, the community should seek to disseminate its characteristics throughout that land." Unquote. In the UK, Islamists have entrenched themselves in senior positions. The current mayor of London, Sadiq Khan, has described jihadist terror as, quote, "part and parcel of life in a big city." We also have Naz Shah, the shadow minister for community cohesion, who has been caught trying to downplay the atrocities of Muslim rape gangs. Then there is Saida Warsi, a baroness who has played a major role in normalizing the myth of Islamophobia. Finally, we mustn't overlook Shahid Malik, the former International Development Minister and the very first Muslim MP. Addressing an audience of 50,000 Muslims in October 2008, Malik outlined his vision of an all-Muslim parliament.
In 1997 we got our first Muslim MP. In 2001 we had 2 Muslim MPs. In 2005 we had 4 Muslim MPs. Inshallah in 2009-10 we'll have 8 Muslim MPs. In 2014 we'll have 16 Muslim MPs. At this rate, the whole parliament will be Muslim. But you know, we've got 4 Muslim MPs, there should be 20 Muslim MPs in Parliament, and inshallah very shortly we'll see that. And I'm confident, as Britain's first Muslim minister, that inshallah in the next 30 years or so, we'll see a Prime Minister in this country who happens to share my faith.
This is how Islam seeks to destroy the West from within. By increasing their numbers and getting into positions of authority, Muslims can successfully erode the cultural defences of Europeans, namely, by presenting racism, colonialism, and xenophobia as Europe's original sins. Thus, while MPs and councillors are distracted with proving that they aren't Islamophobic, jihadists can proceed to implement Sharia one small step at a time. Eventually, they will be in a position to abolish democracy altogether. This is the strategy which Saudi-trained imams promote behind closed doors. Take a look at this clip of Dr. Ijaz Mian, filmed over 10 years ago at Sparkbrook Mosque in Birmingham.
Dr. Mian is yet another UK preacher who has taught in Saudi Arabia. He spent 6 years studying Islam in Ibn Saud University in Riyadh. He wants to see religious police operating on the streets.
They would make sure that every person prays to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. 5 times. Every woman will be covered. From the top to the toes. Hijab. Otherwise the police will just correct them.
He has a radical plan for this country. Muslims shouldn't accept British democracy.
Everywhere, king, queen, House of Commons. If you accept it, then you're a part of it. You don't accept it, but you have to dismantle it. So you being a Muslim, you have to fix it up. There will know what you call House of Commons. From that White House to this Black House, we know that we have to dismantle it.
Muslims must grow in strength, then take over.
You are in a what you call situation in which you have to live like a state within a state till you take over. But until this happens, you have to pray. Or you become in such a force that the people, they just submit to you. Hands up. Till you become strong enough that to take over.
It is in this context that we begin our journey into Islamic supremacism. In Part 1, we will examine jihadist terror and the subjugation of non-Muslims under Islamic rule. To set the scene, permit me to quote the historian Ephraim Karsh at length. In his excellent study, titled Islamic Imperialism, A History, Karsh explains the historical context of Islam's emergence and how Muhammad ultimately succeeded by tapping into the warlike ethos of the nomadic Arabs. Karsh also makes the crucial distinction between Islam, which is imperial in nature, and Christianity, which only became imperial when it was adopted as the official religion of Byzantium, hence the enduring problem of Muslim belligerence. Quote, "Contrary to the conventional wisdom, it is the Middle East where the institution of empire not only originated, for example, Egypt, Assyria, Babylon, Iran, and so on, but where its spirit has also outlived its European counterpart. At the time of the rise of Islam in the early 7th century, the Middle East was divided between the two great rival empires of Byzantium, successor to the Roman Empire, with its capital in Constantinople, and Iran, ruled since the 3rd century by the Sassanid dynasty, with its capital in Ctesiphon, where Baghdad stands today. Though the Arabian Peninsula, birthplace of Islam, was on the fringes of this bipolar system, it was deeply implicated in its activities. The Iranians had colonies throughout eastern and southern Arabia, in Najd and in Yemen, and their influence extended all the way to the Hijaz, the northwestern part of the peninsula. Byzantium's power was felt throughout western Arabia, from the Syrian desert, where it had client kingdoms, to Yemen, where its Ethiopian allies had ruled until they were expelled by the Iranians. In the decades preceding Muhammad's advent, as pastoral practices progressively superseded agricultural and commercial interests, and with trade routes increasingly harassed by marauders, violence had become endemic to Arabian society. This was vividly illustrated by the numerous fratricidal clashes known as Ayyam al-Arab, the days of the Arabians, arising from disputes over such material issues as cattle, pasture lands, or springs, and glorified by contemporary poetry as an ideal of heroism and manhood. We slew in requital for our slain an equal number of them, and carried away an unaccountable number of fettered prisoners. The days have thus raised us to be foremost with our battles in warfare after warfare. Men find in us nothing to point their finger of scorn. No single activity of pre-Islamic society epitomized this warlike ethos more succinctly than the raid, razzia as it is commonly known, a marauding expedition aimed at seizing camels, horses, livestock, or, less frequently, women from a hostile tribe. For most Bedouins, the razzia was not merely a means of subsistence, but rather an exciting social endeavor that helped reaffirm tribal solidarity and win invaluable military experience. So much so that some scholars have described it as the national sport of the nomadic Arabians. Indeed, Muhammad initially devised the concept of jihad, exertion in the path of Allah, as he called his God, as a means to entice his local followers to raid Meccan caravans, instantaneously transforming a common tribal practice into a supreme religious duty, and the primary vehicle for the spread of Islam throughout the ages. He developed and amplified this concept with the expansion of his political ambitions until it became a rallying call for world domination, and he established the community of believers, or the Ummah, as the political framework for the practice of this religion in all territories that it conquered. In doing so, Muhammad at once tapped into the Middle East's millenarian legacy and ensured its perpetuation for many centuries to come. It is true that this pattern of historical development is not uniquely Middle Eastern or Islamic. Other parts of the world, Europe in particular, have had their share of imperial powers and imperialist expansion, while Christianity's universal vision is no less sweeping than that of Islam. The worlds of Christianity and Islam, however, have developed differently in one fundamental respect. The Christian faith won over an existing empire in an extremely slow and painful process, and its universalism was originally conceived in purely spiritual terms that made a clear distinction between God and Caesar. By the time it was embraced by the Byzantine emperors as a tool for buttressing their imperial claims, 3 centuries after its foundation, Christianity had in place a countervailing ecclesiastical institution with an abiding authority over the wills and actions of all believers. The birth of Islam, by contrast, was inextricably linked with the creation of a world empire, and its universalism was inherently imperialist. It did not distinguish between temporal and religious powers, which were combined in the person of Muhammad, who derived his authority directly from Allah and acted at one and the same time as the head of the state and head of the church. This allowed the Prophet to cloak his political ambitions with a religious aura and to channel Islam's energies into its instrument of aggressive expansion, there being no internal organism of equal force to counterbalance it. Whereas Jesus spoke of the kingdom of God, Muhammad used God's name to build an earthly kingdom. He spent the last 10 years of his life fighting to unify Arabia under his reign. Had it not been for his sudden death on June 8, 632 AD, he would have most probably expanded his rule well beyond the Arabian Peninsula. Even so, within a decade of Muhammad's death, a vast empire stretching from Iran to Egypt and from Yemen to northern Syria had come into being under the banner of Islam in one of the most remarkable examples of empire building in world history. Long after the fall of the Ottoman Empire and the abolition of the Caliphate in the wake of World War I, the link between religion, politics, and society remains very much alive in the Muslim and Arab worlds. If Christendom was slower than Islam in marrying religious universalism with political imperialism, it was faster in shedding both notions. By the 18th century, the West had lost its religious messianism. Apart from in the Third Reich, it had lost its imperial ambitions by the mid-20th century. Islam has retained its imperialist ambitions to this day." Unquote.
كل الأديان والعقائد عبر التاريخ البشري تعرضت للنقد والتجريح، وهذا ما ساعد على إصلاحها وتطويرها مع الزمن. العقيدة التي تقطع رقاب منتقديها مصيرها أن تتحول إلى إرهاب وطغيان، وهذا هو حال الإسلام منذ أن بدأ وحتى تاريخ اليوم. حكم على أتباعه بالسجن، ومن تجاوز عتبة ذلك السجن لقي حتفه. الصحيفة الدنماركية مارست حقها في حرية التعبير، والحريات أقدس مقدسات الغرب ولا شيء يعلو عليها. ولكن أقول ولكن لو لم يكن الإسلام على ما هو عليه لما ظهرت تلك الرسوم، فهي لم تأتي من فراغ، ولم ينبشها الرسام من وحي خياله، بل كانت انعكاسا لمعرفته. فالرجل الغربي الذي يقرأ قول محمد جعل الله لي رزقي تحت حد سيفي لا يمكن أن يتخيل عمامة محمد على شكل حمامة سلام وليس على شكل قنبلة. على المسلمين أن يتعلموا كيف يصغون إلى انتقادات الآخرين، علهم يعيدون النظر في التعاليم الإرهابية التي بين أيديهم، ومتى استطاعوا أن يفعلوا ذلك سيراهم العالم بطريقة أفضل، ثم سيرسمهم بطريقة أفضل. ردود فعل المسلمين التي اتسمت بالوحشية والهمجية والتخلف زادت من قيمة تلك الرسوم وأعطتها أهمية أكثر مما تستحق، ببساطة لأنها أثبتت صحة تلك الرسوم وأثبتت صحة الرسالة التي أرادت تلك الرسوم أن ترسلها. المسلم مخلوق ارتكاسي غير عاقل، سلبته تعاليمه عقله وحرضت عواطفه، ولذلك سقطت به إلى مستوى مخلوق دوني لا يستطيع أن يضبط نفسه ولا يستطيع أن يرد على الأحداث بطريقة عقلانية.
ألم تشاهد الأطفال، عشرات الأطفال الذين أبيدوا في غزة في محرقة بشهادة إسرائيل؟
لماذا هم مستاءون مما يجري في غزة؟
تفضل.
وقد قال لهم القرآن أن تقتلوا أو تقتلوا، وهم يقتلون ويقتلون، فأين الغضاضة في الأمر؟
سب للقرآن لا يمكن.
يا سيدتي
عايز أتكلم في سياسة، تتفضل.
يا سيدتي رجاء في السياسة، رجاء، هو كل الكلام بتاعه عن السياسة، ردي عليه في السياسة.
لا أستطيع دكتور فيصل، أنت تعرف أنك لا تستطيع أن تفصل بين الإسلام والسياسة، فالإسلام ليس دينا وإنما سياسة، ويجب أن تدعني أن أعبر عن آرائي بالطريقة التي أريد أن أعبر فيها. عندما اتصلت بي لم تقل أنك لا تستطيعين أن تتناولي الإسلام والقرآن. الإسلام قال لهم أن تقتلوا أو تقتلوا، وها هم يقتلون ويقتلون، فأين الغضاضة؟ هم يريدون الشهادة ويريدون أن يلتقوا بحورياتهم العذراء، وكل ما هنالك إسرائيل تسارع لهم في طلبهم. فأين الخلل في ذلك الأمر؟ إذا أردتم أن تغيروا مجرى الأحداث عليكم أن تعيدوا النظر في التعاليم الإرهابية التي بين أيديكم، عليكم أن تعترفوا بحق الآخر في الحياة وأن تحترموا هذا الحق، عليكم أن تعلموا أطفالكم الحب والسلام والعيش المشترك والعمل المثمر، وعندما تفعلون ذلك سيحترمكم العالم، سيراكم بطريقة أفضل وسيرسموكم بطريقة أفضل. حماس اختارت هذا الطريق وعليكم أن تدفعوا عواقب خياركم. عندما تريدون سلاما ألا على ثقة بأن إسرائيل تريد السلام، ولكن طالما تتلون على أنفسكم تلك التعاليم المليئة بالحقد والضغينة والإرهاب لن تستطيعون أن تصنعوا سلاما مع الآخر. يجب أن تعترفوا بحق إسرائيل في الحياة وتحترموا هذا الحق، وأن تعلموا أولادكم الحب والسلام والعيش المشترك، وعندئذ سيكون هناك سلام. هل دعوتني إلى البرنامج كي أسمع تلك الخطابات الرنانة التي مضى على اشترالها 1400 سنة؟
جميل،
الحمد لله ان احنا عندنا هوية وحضارة.
تصور رجلا يؤمن بقتل تارك الصلاة ينتقد الحريات في الغرب. إنها لمهزلة. أي ماض ذلك الذي يدافع عنه؟ هل يدافع عن الغزو والغنائم؟
ماضي الأمة الإسلامية التي كانت منارة العلم على مستوى العالم،
وإباح ما طاب له من النساء وقطع الرقاب وتقطيع الأيدي والأرجل من خلاف وتكفير الناس وشرب بول الإبل.